All right. So yeah, we're looking at the creation, care, and maintenance of servitors and egregores. Thank you. So first off, let's talk about what a egregore is. This is the term that's often alien to most people. In the room, how many people here are familiar with what an egregore is? Just kind of a show of raise your hand. One, two. Anybody else? Yep, two. Okay. And let's see. Three. All right. So never heard of the term. Excellent. Okay. So an egregore is essentially an entity which is created by a group mind. It is defined by a series of rules or definitions, and essentially it becomes an entity. The way this works is by defining things, using language to define things and give it structure and limitation. It creates a vessel so that the force of nature on the other side can then become embodied through a process of apotheosis, where we basically take unstructured energy and provide it structure. An example of this might be, oh wow, I'm a Nordic Viking guy, and it's really bad weather outside, and the lightning's striking and the thunder's hitting, and I want to know to whom I can appeal to make it all stop. So I create the god Thor, and I define him and give him characteristics and stories that give him a personality. And it is that personality that then allows me to interface between myself on the microcosm and a macrocosm force and find unification. Now, where do we find this information? Well, we find it here in the mystical Kabbalah, in chapter 21, and this is in section 13 through 18, I think it is. Yep. And I'm going to just be pulling from little pieces here and there just to kind of reinforce this idea. The context of this section is this. Oh, I love spiced tea. The context of this section is this, that a question is posed to all of us. And the question is, do you believe in the gods? If the answer is yes, then you'll find yourself consigned to a realm of dreams within the sphere of Netzig. Because the truth is, no, the gods are not real. However, if you answer no, then you'll be turned back, because you have to understand that there are two sides to this. The gods are and are not real. They have actual power, and their power is consigned to them through the adoration of their faithful adherents, who understand and define and focus their worshipful intent on a specific end. So let's take a look and see what Dion Fortune has to say about this. In 13, she says, the gods are the creations of the created. That's us. So we create the gods. They are made by the adoration of their worshipers. Heading down to section 14, the gods are emanations of the group minds of races. They are not the emanation of Ehe, which is the all, right? The all with all capital letters, right? So it's the gods are not an emanation of that, but an emanation from us. Continuing, it says, by means of their influence over the imaginations of their worshipers, they link the microcosm with the macrocosm. By and the product of this, the link comes through use of that interface. All right. On the next page, and this is where historically the idea of how we began to create them. So when we look, for instance, in anthropology, and they talk about animism and primitive cultures, were animistic, meaning that they looked around and they created animal gods to represent different forces of nature. They're not wrong, but they miss the point. Yes, they did in fact do that. So a trickster god might be given the persona of a fox, so that a hunter who is pursuing a fox can appreciate the nature, characteristic, and attributes of that trickster god. But is a fox the trickster god, or is the trickster god a fox? No, that is an attribution that allows us, through the principle of correspondence, to better define the nature of that god. Keep in mind that that god is something greater, a cosmic force, perhaps then expressed through the regular material existence that we have. So continuing on then, the gods are in anyway, continuing in section 15, as man analyzed, oh, hey there, as man has analyzed life and discerned factor by factor its prime motives, he has apotheosized them, meaning that the weather then can be embodied and a god created to manage the weather. An idea of fate, or an idea of time, or an idea of harvest, which is a rhythmic application of creative force, right, to its conclusion. Each of these can then become anthropomorphized into a God expression that I can then commune with, so I can have greater understanding of how these cosmic forces relate to me subjectively, because the gods, as a projection of my psychic intent, are a mirror of myself. That you learn something of yourself by learning of them. Okay? So the process then is that this is conducted solely from the imaginations of the worshipers, as discussed in section 16. And the degree to which one applies their understanding. See, here's the thing. We've got enough stuff here now that we can engage in some good discussion. One of my objections to what you see popularly happening today is that our impression of God, or our impression of a God or a savior, and this is in any modern religious setting for the more part. There are, of course, exceptions everywhere, right? But I'm talking about what is collectively observed. The less we define it, right? If someone says, well, how would you define God? And then there's a lot of humming and hawing, and well, you know, and then there's really no grasp on that. The less that becomes defined within the mind of a person, the less they actually have provided a carapace wherein their egregore can reside. All right. So this is why in the early days of Christianity, in the Council of Nicaea, you had a gathering of everyone, and they hammered out what God was, what Jesus Christ was, what the Holy Ghost was, because they were literally creating an egregore. This was the device that then they would present to the rest of the world and say, here's Jesus Christ, here's the documents which support our egregore, and this is the means by which you commune with this individual. When the Catholic Church would then move out into other communities, Aboriginal communities, and they would recognize, keep in mind, Jesus Christ is an egregore to house the power, potency, and celestial characteristics of the sun, the actual sun, the sun up there, the sun that's giving constant life and salvation and keeping us going and protecting us. It literally is, in Kabbalah, the son of El, the son of God, El being Jupiter. So it's it is a presentation of the force, the eternal force of projective masculine might that brings with it life and chaos into the universe that has no reflection. It casts only light, right? So it is everything from Kether that you see that is embodied within the identifier of the Son and the Son of God, especially within the tree. And it is a unifier. So in that council, they defined all of that and all the attendant characteristics of anything surrounding it to give it solidity. And when they moved into a community or a culture that also worshiped the sun, but had a different value set, they would absorb that culture and convert them into their Christianized faith. The purpose of this is to have more and more adherents to strengthen the egregore that you've created. The more people and the greater psychic mind that is unified in the belief of the specific thing, the better. This is why the Catholic Church got really upset with the Protestant Reformation, because it was eroding the foundations of their egregore by creating other egregores. The anti-Baptists, who later became the Baptists, their entire egregore was built on a different, here's how you get introduced situation of baptism, separating itself from the ordinance work which defined the Catholic egregore. Like you can just keep seeing it historically and watch how certain things become stronger and become weaker over time as a result of our influence. The more rigid we are, the stronger it is. The best example visually I can think of is the genie in the idea of Aladdin. The genie is bound by his wrists, and the bindings are actually what most people don't understand. There's writing on the bindings, which define who that genie is and the scope of their power. So as Robin Williams says, infinite power, tiny little living space. That's all written on the bindings. Okay. Once the bindings are destroyed, the genie loses all of that. It stops being a genie and becomes something else. What makes it what it is what binds it. And this is a property that is experienced within the sphere of Hod, where generation and gender and Genesis are all part of the same thing. And it's an inheritance, a strict inheritance, a severe inheritance that comes from Saturn straight down. So Saturn cuts the cloth, defines everything, limits everything by law. Everything is limited by law. Law has the ultimate say. That then comes through Gevura, what was unified, what was infinite, what was absolute, what was completely free, as expressed as a vibratory essence, just shooting off everywhere from Chesed, slams into Gevura and becomes polarized, becomes distinct, becomes expressive. And as it drops down, that polarization gains its final nuance, its final generative nuance, breaking it into an expression of universal force. And we use all kinds of language to do that, but specifically when we're looking at the structure of an egregore, we're looking at a kind of yes-no situation, a literal binary language situation to define it. Is it this? Yes. Is it this? No. Is it this? And by narrowing that down, by narrowing the scope of that, you empower the egregore. That's why it can't be all things to all people. It has to definitely have a restriction. And the greater the limitation, the greater its power. Now, what's the difference between an egregore and a servitor? Nothing. The one difference is that an egregore is created by group mind, and a servitor can be created by one mind, you. but the creation, care, and maintenance are the same. So a servitor's purpose then, in the past, I talked about how you can create a wide variety of servitors to help you in path working. For me, they're sort of like a cognitive bookmark, a section of myself that I create that is designed to be a placeholder so that I don't have to sit there and work myself all the way up there because I'm already there, or at least part of me is there. And as long as it remains there and I nurture that aspect, I can always get back there in a hurry. What do I mean by this? You know how in the class on rhythm, we talked about how as you choke it up, bringing up the rhythm by polarizing, right? You increase the vibration because you decrease the wavelength. And so as that compresses, you move yourself back up. The oh darn it, my brain just give me a moment. Okay, back to it. I had to. So the idea then of a for instance, leaving a servitor, or in this case, an embassy, which still functions as a servitor. An embassy is just a structural expression of yourself within a different cognitive place or reference. So when I meditate on the tree, I've actually gone to additional length to find a means of personifying aspects of the tree that resonate with me on a level of fiction, meaning that there's the dry description of what it is, and then there are books that you've read in fictional books that supply themselves a really nice, adequate description of what those places might be, the attributions of those places. So if I wish to create an embassy in those places, it's like building a little house. So I meditate on the sphere of chesed. And I understand that chesed ultimately is both chaos and structure simultaneously, that chesed unrestrained, unrestricted by Gevurah and Tiferet, has the potential of being everywhere, all over the place, which could be completely destructive. However, by initiating chesed, by leaving a small residence there that I can simply pop in on, I can use the vibratory essence of chesed to stimulate an immediate elevation because I know I'm already there. It is that state of elevated consciousness that allows me to be forthright with people and say, yes, I am aware, as most people should be, that we retain within ourselves like a pit of just frustration at the very least. And for some people, it's a pit of rage. It's just a pit of outrage for some folks that starts at birth and then goes until you're dying. And what separates you from someone who is driven by that is a recognition that it exists, and then you elevate yourself, you rise above it. It's always going to be there because it's always going to be part of you. But the key is to recognize it's like geothermal energy. It could be inferno down there, but attenuated correctly, it can be a source of productive energy, productive output. Its faceless, seething nature supplies itself as a means of energizing one. The as part of this, I want to say that the risk is always to become unbalanced. So it's important to recognize that one remains balanced if they're ever accessing that pool. Otherwise, leave it alone and recognize it exists, and recognize that it is there to serve you, just as the seething core of our planet serves us, right? So Tony says, what is a golem? He's a short guy who covets the ring and that coughs a lot. I'm just kidding. Okay, a golem is a golem. There are several forms of golems, but essentially what it is uh, um, Frankenstein creates a flesh golem. Okay. In Jewish mysticism, you can create a golem of clay that then can be invested with your intent um, and empowered by you to engage in acts in your behalf. So typically it's murderous acts, right? There are no happy golem stories out there, you know, like, hey, I built a golem to go plow the field. It's usually the source of power for that golem, ironically, we're just talking about it, is that seething pit of rage. And then that is just channeled into the golem. I hate. And then it just is, you're dumping that in and dumping that in and dumping that in and creating a well point of that. It's super damaging. Like, I absolutely suggest avoiding doing anything like that whatsoever, because it's when you engage in that, because it is you, the one thing that can harm you is yourself. That's it. Everything around you, you can't be hurt by, but you can hurt yourself quite deeply, and you can hurt yourself in many different ways. When we engage in that kind of negative emotive act, it's like turning on a flamethrower, except for your hands are the flamethrower. So the fire is just shooting out of you, and you're just taking damage as well. Like, the amount that goes out is the amount that comes back. And in brief, since we're here, might as well talk about it. Some of you may have had experience in Wicca or Gardnerian Wicca. Gerald Gardner promulgated a myth, which is irritating and has been, because it's been repeated so often, people take it as true. And that is that if I have a certain intent that's negative and I pour that out into the universe, it'll rebound on me threefold. That's complete bunk. It violates the principle of rhythm. The outflow is the measure of the inflow. So if I put out a bunch of hate into the universe, I will get exactly that amount of hate back, which is sufficient, because if my hate is enough to motivate large groups of people into action, then imagine all that focused right back down on you. It's pretty horrible. So, you know, the compounded effect outward will equal the compounded effect inward. So all of that is an extraordinarily destructive. On the other side of things, the amount of love that you put into the universe is also reciprocated, right? Just as hate can build and grow and manifest and be infectious, so too can love. And I'm talking about true, genuine, it's you, you know, that kind of thing, love. Where your attitude and vibratory essence is something that people recognize and are drawn to, okay? Because that is what love does. Hate pushes away, and love draws to you. So, let me get some drink here. Oh, good, we're right on time. So let's talk about some now with servitors. So there, like I said, two forms. The mobile servitor can be any number of things. And again, the key is the key that might make people uncomfortable is your capacity to imagine. Imagination is your power. Imagination is the source point of every single creative act in the entire length of human history. From imagining how to make a fire, to imagining how to build a house, to imagining how to project oneself and one's consciousness across great thresholds of time and space, and across dimensions, across vibratory aspects of dimensions and across other worlds, or as Philip K. Dick might suggest, across alternate realities. All of that is a component of this kind of idea. Now, let's talk about, there are certain common egregores which are employed to help you kind of grasp this. For instance, like the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, each of these supply themselves as an egregore. When I was a child, they used to have these stop motion cartoons, and they taught us about Santa Claus. They taught us about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And each of those then creates for you over time an established point of consciousness that bridges you from your subjective standpoint in the microcosm to an objective standpoint in the macrocosm. When you look at egregores, for instance, like Santa Claus or Rudolph, you can see in Rudolph's case, you get the idea of an outsider made good, an outsider who recognizes their talents and then actualizes them. Rudolph, in a way, is my hero because he shows you, don't waste your time trying to be something you're not. Take what you are and become exceptional, because that's what you're supposed to do. Don't be Michael Jordan trying to play baseball. Get back, grab that basketball, and be legend forever and ever, right? That's the difference. And so Rudolph, being himself, is an example of that and allows you to cling, if you're familiar with the story, to that macrocosmic ideal. Just like contemplation, so contemplating Rudolph helps me do that, just as contemplation of the god Apollo helps one understand the ideal of beauty, right? What all of that is about and how that affects us. There are egregores which are established around human experiences. These to me tend to be weaker because they become less and less defined over time. And what I mean by that are the personification of victory or the personification of freedom. These are employed or are in use almost always at times of war or revolution. But then once that time is over, then the egregore goes into kind of a hibernation because it's not needed, right? We don't need the liberté with her racing across with the armies behind her. You know, that those things are necessary only when one feels oppressed. So egregores can come in and out. The beauty of one is once one is established historically, once an egregore is built, it can be reconnected to at any time after the point of its origin. The key is to remember it means nothing. What you think it means nothing. What the creator of the egregore thought it means everything. So if you pursue its original creation, if you seek to understand what these ancient gods or goddesses were about, and in order to commune with them, that's how to do it. Just as Gypsy said, if you don't understand the essential nature of what it is you seek to commune with, there is no communion. And that applies also to your a servitor of your own creation. The difference between the ultimate difference between an egregore and a servitor is the amount of investment personally that you have to do in order to maintain it. If I'm looking at a community egregore that is supplied and established by a group mind, then I can go once a week on Sunday and celebrate that then, and everything will be fine for me. on a flat line level, right? I won't lose anything, but I'm not necessarily gaining anything, but I still have access to the egregore because I'm participating once a week. If you participate with a communal consciousness on a daily basis, then your communion is going to be proportionally stronger. This is a faith building thing. Faith being the first principle of all action. It's the thing which leads to every other thing. It is the stepping off of the fool off of the cliff, right? It is the trudging forward of the ox of Olive. It is the first force that comes from Kether as an expression of universe. And faith is that. That is what faith is. And so utilize the more that your faith is supplied with definition, the stronger your faith is. And what defines your faith is how you work with it, what kind of things you're willing to do for it. If you sacrifice something for your faith, it becomes stronger because you've placed limitation on yourself in relation to the faith which you're employing. So the more I limit my actions, the stronger my faith is, because of the fact that it's an adherence to what is required to maintain it. If I'm working with a servitor, every day that I'm not working with it is a day that it gets more fluffy. And by that, I mean, it's egregores are like building a statue and then inhabiting it with a spark of some kind of universal force or intelligence. All right. A servitor is almost the exact opposite. It's building a fluffy cloud that you're constantly pushing together with increasing definition, because you realize that's what's important. As I compress it and remove the things that it is not, I find and discover the thing that it is. And so that requires daily work. If you want to have a successful servitor that you can work with, that you can send out for specific knowledge, and almost always, because of the nature of the work within Hod, a servitor is a spirit of air. Makes sense, right? Hod resides within the realm of air. It's within Yetzirah, and a spirit of mind or consciousness is what is created or drawn from your mind or consciousness. So as a result, you got the fluffy cloud that needs to be condensed into something that you can work with. So let's see what's left. So that's pretty much it. Any questions? Nope. We good? Aha,
I got a quick question.
Yes, please.
So when it comes to, we're considering Jesus as an egregore, I get that for sure. And it's interesting because it makes it very obvious as to why you need to go sing worship songs on Sunday. Of course, that's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, but it's not the point. When it comes to more contemporary thinking and conversations about the Christ consciousness, my sense is that is fundamentally different from the Jesus egregore.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that may be a concept that is more aligned to trying to point to Ehia and not the Jesus persona egregore.
Yes. And I want to point something out that I think is funny. You mentioned, oh, this is might offend some people, right? That's built into the egregore of Jesus. It's like Fight Club. We just don't talk about Fight Club, right? So you can't It's built into it. You feel reluctance to just go at it, which is amazing. I do. Keep in mind, man, I've got a quarter century of my life devoted to that egregore and its specific definition. And I appreciate it still. It's just that I don't work with that. In fact, I work with the other. And there's a dramatic difference between an egregore that is essentially a demigod, sandal-wearing rabbi that occupied space and air and bathed and ate and everything, right? And the idea of Christ consciousness, which is a conception of a higher mental state, an elevated state of consciousness involving a perspective that allows for the annihilation of the self in favor of unification with the divine. So that's that. I always, when I think of Christ consciousness, I feel like something pulling me up. You know what I'm saying? Like I just feel like that's the intent, to lift you up, and up is in, and in takes you to that natural state, and the natural state is where you are unrestricted. And interestingly enough, it goes back into the, I was going to talk with Saturn a little bit. We're out of time, but I'm going to continue just for a moment. The idea is that energized state of being in Chokmah has no definition, really. When it comes out of Keter, there's absolutely no definition. By the time it comes into Chokmah, we're seeing a bifurcation, right? Dualism is introduced, but beyond that, there's nothing else to define it. When it drives into Binah, everything stops and everything is defined. The first creative act happens there, and then is transmitted downward into the tree. So it's when we realize that as we work towards a state of Christ consciousness, we are freeing ourselves from the limitation of that interaction with Binah. That is going away. That's the goal. And that means an annihilation of the self in favor of an elevated, unified state of consciousness, which today, in esoteric terms, we might say is a conversation with the holy guardian angel, right? So your higher self again. Cool.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tony. Parks.
Thanks, Aubrey.
My pleasure. Thank you. I will see you guys at 1 o'clock. Talk to you soon.